Right now, somewhere in the world, a woman is lying on her back in a hospital bed under fluorescent lights, hooked to a monitor she can barely read, while a nurse she met 40 minutes ago tells her she's not dilated enough yet. That nurse will be replaced by another nurse at shift change, and another after that. The woman giving birth may go through 3 or 4 strangers before the baby finally arrives. For the entire history of our species, this is the only version of childbirth that would have seemed genuinely terrifying to our ancestors. Not the pain, not the blood, being alone. Here's the thing nobody talks about when we discuss how ancient humans gave birth. It isn't the herbs, or the squatting position, or the lack of epidurals. It's this. Human birth is the only birth in the primate world that biologically requires a witness, not a preference for one. Requires one. And understanding why reveals something unsettling about how modern medicine accidentally broke a system that took 2 million years to build. To understand how that happened, you have to start with the trap. Around 2 million years ago, our ancestors began walking fully upright. That reshaped the pelvis, narrowed it, restructured it for balance rather than for birthing large infants. Around the same time, hominin brains started growing. Bigger brains meant smarter offspring, better survival. Evolutionary pressure pushed hard in that direction. But bigger brains meant bigger heads. And bigger heads meant those newly restructured hips were increasingly inadequate for the job. 2 million years of selection pressure, pulling in opposite directions. Every other primate solved this the same way. Give birth to a neurologically immature infant early, before the head gets too large, and make up the difference with a very long nursing period. Humans did the same thing, but we took it further than anyone. Human babies are the most helpless newborns of any primate. Born roughly 9 months too early by chimpanzee standards, unable to hold their own heads up, unable to feed themselves, and unable to regulate their own temperature for months. A chimpanzee infant clings to its mother's fur within hours of birth. A human infant can't even track a moving object reliably for the first few weeks of life. You would think evolution would have corrected this eventually. Wider hips, smaller heads, something. Instead, it did something stranger. It built a social structure around the problem. Researchers at the University of Zurich laid this out clearly in a 2025 paper. Cooperative breeding didn't follow from the difficult birth. It was the prerequisite. Communities that pooled resources around pregnant and labouring women sharing food, dividing physical labour, surrounding her during delivery, produced more surviving children. Those children had larger brains. Larger brains made birth harder. This increased the selection pressure for even more sophisticated community support. The loop fed itself across 2 million years of human prehistory. Think about what that means. The group of women who gathered around a labouring mother wasn't a cultural nicety layered on top of biology. It was the biology. It was the mechanism that made human intelligence possible in the first place. Now think about what we did with that engine. Anthropologists who have spent time with the Hadza of Tanzania, one of the few remaining hunter-gatherer groups on Earth, with continuous cultural memory stretching back tens of thousands of years, describe birth as a communal event with no real equivalent in industrialized societies. Multiple experienced women present, specific roles, not improvised ones. The labouring woman upright, leaning, squatting, using gravity. The cord is left intact until it stops pulsing. That last practice, waiting for the cord, is worth pausing on. In 1801, a physician named Erasmus Darwin wrote that cutting the cord too soon was very injurious to the child, and that it should always be left until the child had breathed fully and all pulsation in the cord had ceased. He was describing what midwives had known for thousands of years, what hunter-gatherer women practiced without being told to, because they had watched it work across generation after generation and simply never stopped. By the 1940s, early cord clamping within 30 seconds of birth had become standard practice in hospitals worldwide. The knowledge was gone, not lost to time or catastrophe, overwritten, replaced by a newer protocol that turned out to be wrong. In 2013, the World Health Organization released formal guidelines recommending delayed cord clamping. It had taken over a century to re-arrive at what Erasmus Darwin had already written down and what ancient midwives had simply never stopped doing. That pattern, ancient knowledge erased, then slowly rediscovered, is the story of industrialized childbirth. But the erasure didn't happen all at once. and it didn't happen by accident. Here's the part that should unsettle you. In the 1840s, a Viennese physician named Ignaz Semmelweis noticed something statistically impossible. The maternity ward staffed by male doctors had a mortality rate from childbed fever of around 10%. The ward next door, staffed by midwives, had a rate of around 2%. He traced it to the doctor's habit of moving directly from performing autopsies to delivering babies without washing their hands. He demanded hand washing. Mortality in his ward dropped to below 1%. His colleagues rejected him. His hospital director took away his maternity ward. He died in an asylum in 1865, 2 years before Louis Pasteur's germ theory gave the world the vocabulary to understand exactly why he had been right all along. The transition from midwives to male physicians in the 18th and 19th centuries wasn't a story of medicine improving on tradition. For a generation of women, it was the opposite. The knowledge that went with those midwives wasn't written down. It couldn't be, because for most of human history, the knowledge of women's bodies was considered women's domain, and therefore not worth recording in the texts that men wrote for other men. It lived in hands, in the memory of those who had attended 100 births and seen what worked, in the quiet instruction passed from an experienced woman to the apprentice kneeling beside her. When the profession was displaced, the transmission broke. Within a generation or two, what had taken thousands of years to accumulate was simply gone. What got left behind? The Cochrane Review, published in 2017, analysed 26 randomised trials, covering more than 15,000 births across multiple countries and health systems. Women who had continuous support from a person they trusted during labour had labours that were, on average, 41 minutes shorter. They were 39% less likely to deliver by caesarean section. They used 10% less pain medication. The effect was strongest when the support person was experienced, but not a hospital staff member. In other words, someone functioning exactly like a traditional midwife. 41 minutes. That number is not a minor statistical footnote, and it doesn't feel like one to anyone who's been through labour. Labour is a hormonal event. Oxytocin drives contractions, and oxytocin is also the primary hormone of social bonding and trust. The same chemical that tells your body to open and push is the chemical that spikes when someone you love puts a hand on your shoulder. You cannot fully separate the biology of birth from the social context in which it evolved. Researchers studying Hadza mothers found something that initially made no sense by Western clinical standards. The women showed no significant correlation between the stresses that typically predict postpartum depression in industrialized countries and their actual mood outcomes. The stresses were there: high infant mortality, physical hardship, real danger. But so was something else: a postpartum period embedded in the community. Other women are bringing food. Older children were absorbed into the group's care. No alarm was going off at 6 a.m., telling her she was expected back. The fourth trimester, as some researchers now call it, looked in practice a lot like what hunter-gatherer communities had always called normal. In the United States and across Europe, postpartum depression rates consistently exceed 10% under ordinary circumstances. During the COVID-19 lockdowns, when hospital visitor restrictions left new mothers isolated in ways that had no precedent in recorded medical history, not even close, that rate climbed to 1 in 3. The body was sending a signal. It had been sending the same signal at lower volume for generations. We had learned to call that signal a disorder rather than a message. The message, if you read it as an evolutionary artifact rather than a clinical anomaly, is not complicated. This was not supposed to happen alone. The strangest part of this entire story is where it ends. The most advanced hospitals in the world, the ones with the best outcomes, the lowest intervention rates, the highest patient satisfaction, are the ones that figured out how to put community back inside the delivery room, dedicated labour support, continuous nursing assignments across shifts. Policies that keep partners present through the night. They don't describe these as a return to ancient practice. They call them evidence-based improvements. But the evidence keeps pointing at the same answer it always was. 2 million years of evolutionary pressure, selected for a system where women were never alone during the most dangerous hours of their lives. That system built the human brain. It kept the species alive through every ice age, every migration, every collapse that could have ended the whole experiment. We spent about 200 years trying a different approach. The question isn't whether the old system worked. The bones tell us it did. The question is why it took this long to notice what we'd replaced it with, and what we're still quietly trying to find our way back to.